Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. We've got another win to talk about. That's good. It wasn't the most convincing win in the world, but hey, it's another victory, back-to-back victories nevertheless. Yeah, clean sheets as well, back-to-back as well. No conceding first, rubbish, so that's good. And we've got some other little bits and pieces to talk about. Little things that started bubbling away, funny enough, just as I was about to start doing this video. So it would have been earlier today, this video, but I was taking my daughter, my youngest, back to uni. So, well, technically my wife was, and I was sat in the passenger seat with loads of stuff all over me. Honestly, if you've ever had to take a kid back to university, you know the absolute amount of stuff that goes back and forth with them. So, yes, I was sitting in a car, but pretty much covered in stuff, just about enough to look out of a window and to watch Spurs under-21s match, actually, on my phone. But enough of my day. Tottenham. So let's start with the cup draw. That's just happened not too long before. Actually, it was a little while before I did this. It was on the journey back. Preston away. It's not a Premier League team. Look at it that way. But it's not easy. Preston kind of where are they, 10th in the Championship. It's not going to be easy. It's a long old journey. 220 miles between the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium and Preston. Please don't be a late night match. Please don't be one that we can't get back from. Otherwise, I'd rather be able to just jump on a train and come back. It's not to say I'm sure Preston's a lovely place, but I'd rather just come back after the game. It's a long old trek. We hit Burnley, obviously not being a Premier League team anymore, but yet we've got to head all the way back up north for this game. Weekend of January 27th it'll be. So we don't know which yet, but knowing Spurs, it'll end up something like a Friday night game or something like that. Weirdly, we've moved on from having a game between Spurs and one lone strikers club, Dane Scarlett's Portsmouth, to now going on to another one with Troy Parrott's Preston. So, strange one there. If you're wondering what's happened to Troy Parrott, obviously he's had a knee injury since October. But good news for him, he's just been given the all clear by Spurs to start playing again. I think he's had 4 or 5 days worth of training with Preston, and hopefully, I think this FA Cup weekend came a little bit too soon for him, but hopefully next match maybe be able to take some part in it. So that's good news for him as well. Yeah, that's the FA Cup draw. There was a little element of the FA Cup draw that I had to mention. Obviously, City absolutely smashing Chelsea means that whether you want it to happen or not, means Spurs obviously got the 2 City games. They will now stay in place. Had City and Chelsea drawn, there would have been a replay, and that would have removed one of the games. I think maybe the second one, it would have been the home one, would have been bounced again, I think. So no, as it is, City will play City will play Arsenal or Oxford. I should have very stressed that, or Oxford, at the end of this month. And then we'll play Spurs for a second time in those games in very close proximity to each other. On another very quick note, brilliant result for Stevenage, which I'm really happy about. I used to kind of cover them a little bit when I was back in my pre-Spurs days. Really good club, lovely people there. Still go there quite regularly for Spurs under-21 matches, so brilliant to see them pull off that result against Aston Villa with some late drama. That was really cool. What else? Just saw, as I was about to start doing this, all the stuff and Spurs fans getting kind of some excited, some not too happy. I don't really know the way to judge it. It's difficult because obviously things at Spurs being as they are, with the dissatisfaction with the owners from a section of the fan base, any kind of tantalising glimpse of a potential takeover, I suppose, is viewed with excitement. I think it was a report about the Qatar sports investment. I think it was investments. Sorry. Look, I don't really like to comment on other people's reports because I don't want it to seem like I'm doing them down or being disrespectful to anyone else's reports. The only thing I can say is that myself and others, will have all checked this out with Spurs as well after, this has kind of gone out there. And I think it sounds like we've all got exactly the same response, told that there was absolutely no truth to it. Of course, you've got to take that as you will. That's not me saying that the report is rubbish or anything like that whatsoever before the aggregators jump onto that. It is, of course, just what Spurs are saying about it. So it's up to you, I guess, whether you believe it or not. Whether they would reveal. Look, it's a really difficult one when it comes to things like that because, like, for instance, myself, I know many times in the past I've been well aware that very, very, very rich people, like billionaires from Asia, NFL owners, have been shown around the training ground, shown around the stadium, things like that. But 99.9% of that sort of stuff is nothing. It's not nothing, but it doesn't lead to anything as exciting or big as a takeover and things like that. Sometimes it is just people looking around, people wanting to understand technology stuff, especially with the American NFL owners. Pretty much all the time that's to do with the NFL partnership. It's called information sharing. So Spurs, their board members, Levy, whoever, will have gone out to various NFL stadiums, let's say, and looked at their setup and taken inspiration and ideas. Best practice, I think it's called, to take back. May well be that there's some little deals and things that have come of it. I don't know, sponsorship, whatever. But it pretty much most of the time doesn't really build to anything more exciting. So yeah, I think the report said, I don't even know if it was a report or a tweet. I don't entirely know exactly what it was, but it was about having held talks with Spurs. And yes, the word from Spurs is absolutely no truth in it. But I should stress that, that I guess is what that's really difficult. I don't want to say the club would say that. If they're saying that, that's all I can take it on as face value. Like I said, those various ones before that I've heard about, it's one of those where, I know there was people there. I know because I've spoken to various sources that have seen these people going around there. But ultimately, it wasn't something I could really write a story on because it didn't really mean anything. There was no kind of edge to it about it being a takeover or anything like that, or anything more than purely someone visiting a training ground or a stadium. It's an awkward one. I mean, you see, this is, when it comes to the business side of things, I'd say it's even more difficult than transfer stuff, things like that, because, you've seen it in recent years. I mean, how many people have we had linked with the stadium naming rights? How many stories have there been that's about to be tied up? And, every time, it's put to people within Spurs, and people within Spurs say, no, nothing incoming. And here we are. I think that there was one in the summer, I remember, and here we are now in January of the next year, and none of that happened. There was obviously the Google excitement, and then that kind of really just turned out to be one of the many firms that would have spoken to Spurs over the years about it. Who knows? It may end up being something more than that, but obviously at the time, I think it's almost like, and I include myself in this, any kind of crumb that the media can grab about something that is a long-running thing, like a takeover, naming rights, whatever, you want to report on it. And you want to try and get it out there. And it's, I think, gets people very excited about something that sometimes, like I say, in those instances, it might have been companies they've previously spoken to but didn't end up going anywhere. And God, there's so many names, honestly. Who knows what they're going to end up calling that stadium eventually. I still don't know why it's not been done any sooner. I don't know. Before people ask me, I don't understand why it's taken this long. I know they're obviously holding out for the best price possible, and they want it to be competitive with all the big deals over in America that have happened. And I know there was also a desire to sort it out once COVID hit and the pandemic and you couldn't get into stadiums. There was a desire to wait until afterwards for I guess, the finances of companies willing to make the deal happen being better, but also being able to show off the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium better. With the NFL back, with the concerts back, with of course, the main thing, Premier League. The reason I said NFL was that because obviously it's the American audience and the concerts are seen by different audiences as well. But obviously Premier League will be the one that's seen by the most. But yeah. So that's kind of, that's all I can really say on that one. You can only kind of go on what the club say right now, because literally it was just me doing this video, making some inquiries before I started the video. So it's not been the most in-depth investigation, but it'd be interesting. I'd be surprised. I don't know, because people remind me. I said, when was I say? Was it last year? Might have been last year. I was told by someone that there was this 18-month window, I think it was, where Spurs were going to be at their peak value. There was a feeling. And I said that, that could be a... if they were ever going to think about it, that would be during that window. Also, not if they were ever, that's not right. But a good time to think about it would have been in that window. And I think a lot of people kind of took that as they will be sold. And it's not. Of course, I'm sure if they got a great offer came in, they would consider it. There's so much to Tottenham. It's such a strange club now, because it's always been a strange club. Maybe not way back in the past, but in modern history it's been a stranger club. There's so much to it, because obviously you've got the football side of it, you've got everything that can go there, but then of course there is the bit that some people don't really like, which is, I guess, the scale of the club as an entire entity, not just the football side of things. So, it's a club that now is a profitable club, a very profitable club. It brings in a lot of revenue. So you would think that for someone out there, it would be an attractive proposition to make a lot of money out of. But because football isn't really a game where you make a lot of money out of, and if you find a club that is run... I was going to say, well financially, off the pitch, definitely on the pitch. I think we know that it hasn't been run in the most optimum way at times. But off the pitch, clearly it's difficult. Again, you can look at it in different ways. You could say it's run successfully off the pitch in terms of a financial generator. But then, you often hear me use the expression speculate to accumulate. And I'm sure there's been times in the past, had they made a slightly different decision, put a little bit more money into a transfer or something, maybe the club would be worth even more now, because of the brand and whatever you want to call it, the jargon would have grown because of any success on the pitch. But what do I know? I'm just a journalist who wears Captain America t-shirts. I didn't even realise I was wearing that. Which shows what a long day it's been. But yeah, so that's that on that. I saw various people tweeting and asking what I thought of it. And again, I'm not saying that I know whether there's no truth in anything like that, but all I can say is what's coming out of Tottenham, and this phrase, absolutely no truth in it. So that's not me doing down any reports. That is Tottenham's opinion on it. So we turn to yesterday's game. 61,161 fans. Fair play, honestly. So you'd think sometimes in a cup game there's not going to be as big a crowd, but that was a big crowd. I would say that having had the away fans being so noisy at Palace and brilliant at Palace in midweek, I would say that it was the away fans again that were making probably the most noise yesterday. The Portsmouth fans, 9,000, obviously a bigger allocation because it's the FA Cup. They were very noisy. They were very good. They had lots of quiet... very classic kind of Football League chants, which kind of reminded me of my days back covering those kind of games. It was not an FA Cup classic. I do feel for the 60,161 people that did pay their money to go and see it. I think it was better priced, wasn't it? I do unfortunately live a bit in a bubble when it comes to matches, because obviously I have a press pass, I have the licence to go in, so I'm not always aware of what the ticket prices are. I'm very privileged in that point of view. But I think, from what I can tell from people on Twitter, that it was well packaged or priced or something, and that was why it had such a good crowd, and of course leads people to wonder why you can't have those kind of prices for other games as well. But yeah, it was not a classic. Spurs didn't really get out of first gear, but then they didn't really need to. They weren't particularly great, but again, they didn't have to be. They're in the fourth round now against Preston, and they really barely had to lift a glove on their opponent. That's not to say Portsmouth didn't battle. They did. They were very organised, very compact, really tried to keep Spurs out. But ultimately, other than one overhead, it was like an acrobatic kind of bicycle kick from Rico Hackett-Fairchild, which Fraser Forster saved. They didn't have another shot. I think they may have only had 3 shots at goal in the whole game. So yeah, it was that kind of game. Spurs definitely weren't particularly great going forward. They don't really deserve much praise in that regard. But there's some little elements we can talk about. I think a key thing for Conte, and we'll talk about Conte in a bit because he's had a rough old week. I do feel sorry for him. Yeah, I do. We'll talk about that in a moment. The players he was able to rest: Hugo Lloris just sat on the bench, didn't have to come on. Højbjerg didn't have to come on. Romero didn't have to come on. Matt Doherty didn't have to come on. Clement Longley didn't have to come on either. So that was all really helpful. Eric Dyer wasn't even in the matchday squad. He was sat behind them at the stadium. And actually, Conte went one step further with even Perisic. Perisic was given the weekend off. And bearing in mind the Spurs players have also been given a couple of days off after the game, it meant he got a nice long weekend. I think the logic with Perisic is, which is fair enough, that he obviously came straight back pretty much, or not long after that third place match he won with Croatia. And yeah, so it was a chance to really just give him a little bit of time back. And bear in mind, what is he, 33? I think he's 34, not too long. And he played, I think, was it the most minutes of Spurs played at the World Cup, I feel like. And he has come back and played every game. So, good decision, worked out. They got the win, he got the rest. The only the only kind of main key starters from the previous game, although Skippy did end up coming in, was Brian Hill, Sonny, and Kane at the front 3. I think he originally changed the 8 behind them and it became 7 with Basuma heading out after the warm-up. Christian Stellini we've had in the last couple of pressers, pre-match and post-match, and he explained that he pretty much said before the game that those 3 attackers were going to start because there was no alternative. I suppose the only alternative they could have done was gone with a 3 in midfield, but as it was on the day, you'd have had to probably use Højbjerg to do that. So, yeah. So they all played. It's not the worst thing in the world. With Arsenal being 8 days after it, the North London derby, it was a chance for, Brian Hill and Sonny to get a little bit more momentum after, getting some confidence against Palace. And, of course, a chance for Kane to keep scoring goals. So, yeah, it wasn't the biggest deal in the world. Had there been an injury, of course, there would have been. But, yeah, as it was, it worked out fine. And like I say, managed to put the 10-game concede first curse way back into the rearview mirror now with 2 in a row without conceding first. I did write down the stats. It was just 3 shots all afternoon Portsmouth managed. Look, it should be, of course, any kind of praise should be tempered by the fact that obviously Portsmouth are having not the greatest of times because they had to sack they sacked Danny Cowley in the week. Kind of really struggling to get wins in recent months ago. 9-game winless run. I even wrote it down. So Spurs, understandably, had 72% possession. Obviously, a lot of possession. 18 shots on goal, but it did only manage 1 on target. I think you know what that was. It was Harry Kane, of course, curling it home. Beautiful finish as he was kind of sliding from Ryan Sessegnon's 1-2 with him. So, they did the job. There's no point going overboard and excited about it. I will talk about some of the younger players, probably Harry as well in a little bit. But there's also probably not too much you can go in the other way and say, they were rubbish and all this sort of stuff, because ultimately in a weekend where we've seen loads more cup upsets, Spurs did a reasonably professional job. And like I say, was going to call them Stevenage. Portsmouth did set up really, really compactly and organised and well. They got 11 behind the ball most of the time. So it did become a case of breaking them down, and especially in a team that wasn't thriving with creativity. You know, I suppose some might say, when is it? But, you know, they did rip Palace apart in that second half with 4 goals. So, you know, it's a team that definitely has that within them. But, again, they just did the job. So Conte, I was going to talk about Conte. He's had a tough old week emotionally, obviously. Gianluca Vialli, incredibly sad, passed away after his long battle. Only 58, wasn't he, Gianluca Vialli? Just one of those guys that came across in everything you saw him or heard him or anything as just a really good guy. And anyone I've spoken to has said very similar about him. Just a really, really nice guy. Really nice chap. And of course, Conte has that link that they were Juventus teammates and close friends. And yeah, he found the news, from what I understand. Conte found out the news that he died while driving into work on Friday morning, which is obviously rubbish. So when he arrived, he was, you know, not in a good way, very upset, of course. And later in the day, I think the press conference got changed to being Christian Stellini was going to step in and do it, and he did. On a very brief side note, Stellini's a really interesting person to have in a press conference. Very different to Conte. I'm not saying Conte's not interesting, but Stellini says far fewer words, but gets straight to the point. He's quite good in that. He kind of is barely longer as pressers than probably Nuno Lenneth. A little bit longer, to be fair, but he very much kind of gets to the exact point. I've been able to ask him some quite good stuff. Asked him at Brian Hill and Mata Sarr on Friday, and he gave really interesting answers. I think I've got the Pape one later on. But sorry, back to Conte. Later in the day, he did put a photo of the two men, him and Vialli, going out for a meal a few months ago. Had a really sad, nice but sad, of course, message underneath. Having dinner together in London a few months ago, as we had fun remembering all our adventures and battles on the field. Unfortunately, in these last few years, you had to fight a great and terrible battle in life. I told you and wrote that you have always been an inspiration to me as my captain, and for how you were proving to be strong, proud and brave, fighting like a lion against this disease, always in my heart, my friend. It's a really beautiful message. It is. And it's just come at such a kind of, obviously there's no good time for it, but it just has come as a run of Conte losing kind of big people in his life. Obviously, Gianpiero Ventroni, of course, in October, wasn't it? Yeah, October he died. God, that's gone so quickly, that time. That's mad. But also, I want to get his name right because I was always terrible at trying to pronounce his name. Sinisa Mihailovic, who obviously was a former Serie A player and manager at various clubs, and he was very, very close with Conte, and he died this month. So poor old Antonio has had a really crap month, crap few months in terms of losing big people in his life in the football world. So yeah, really not good at all. Stellini did speak about it. He said, Gianpiero was a really tough moment. Then came that moment of Mihailovic. Antonio and Mihailovic were friends. Now is the moment of Vialli. It's a tough moment. It's difficult. For us to speak about the moment you have in the deep. Antonio is a tough man. Maybe this moment is more closed to show his feelings. Only this. We have to stay close to him. Stay together. This is a family behaviour. We feel like a family. After this type of loss, you have to stay so close to show love. And he kind of explained that Conte is more of a man. You know, we see this kind of very emotional, outgoing character who'll have outbursts and everything on the touchline. Assini kind of suggested that that's more his football persona. Whereas maybe away from football, he's a little bit more contemplative and keeps stuff to himself. He said, about football, yes, we speak. About work, absolutely, we speak a lot. To speak about other things is more difficult. In the tough moments, maybe you don't show, or the silence is more than words. We're in that moment. He doesn't drop the intensity. He can find new energy because this is the type of man. This is Antonio. It's a shame that, isn't it? Because I think kind of in this modern world we're encouraged to talk more and share more and kind of get these burden of these kind of tough times and kind of share it and spread it a little bit, I guess, and not take everything on ourselves too much. And yeah, I don't know. There's a bit of me that maybe because he's an older chap from a different generation, and maybe I did feel that a little bit sad, kind of in a way that they weren't able to speak, or they weren't able, but they didn't really speak. But everyone deals with stuff in totally different ways. I understand that. But what is a good thing, I think, is that he's had his wife and daughter around him. They have been around for this kind of whole festive period. They are heading back to Italy, obviously, with a couple of days off. Conte's gone back with them for a couple of days. And I think his daughter's back at school from next week. So obviously they'll stay there and then he'll come back. And it's a sad time. And, I know it's a cliche, but hopefully, I guess the football, which is something he is so poured into and invested into, gives him something to lift his spirits a bit, give him something to cheer. Obviously, a very, very, very big, relatively week in terms of football with the North London derby. So, his focus, no doubt, will be back on that, or will be on that. So the match yesterday, I wanted to talk about Harry Kane. Of course, I've got more stats for you, more history made. He's just a phenomenal striker. He really is. If I told you that only one of Spurs' 18 shots had got on target, and asked you who do you think it had, who had that shot, you'd have told me. And that's the measure of Harry Kane, really. His goal was beautiful. Inch perfect. It was probably the one real moment of quality in the game, and it won the game. And of course, unless you've been living under a rock, you will know that it's his 265th goal for Spurs, which places him just one behind now, the late great Jimmy Greaves. Incredible strikers, both of them. And also sets up the very tantalising possibility that we could have Harry Kane becoming either joint or more all-time top scorer for Tottenham in the North London derby. And he does like a North London derby goal. So yeah, that was that's an interesting one. Just by the way, just going very briefly back to the Qatar stuff, I think there's a tweet being dredged up from 2014 or something about a £1 billion takeover that I think some people are maybe reading into something being more modern. I was just trying to say, because I was getting very small messages about it. I think someone shared it and people aren't looking at the date. I think, unless there's something else while I'm doing this is being reported. I don't know. But back to Harry. We had this weird historical similarity that both Jimmy Greaves and Harry Kane scored their 265th goal for Spurs on January the 7th. Of course, Jimmy Greaves a little while earlier, on 1970. Everyone I've spoken to at Spurs who kind of was around for a long time, has said that the feeling in the club that no one was ever going to beat Jimmy Greaves before Harry Kane started to become this really prolific striker. You think back to that list, you had Jimmy Greaves obviously 266. But you also had Bobby Smith was 208. So that was 58 behind Greaves itself. And then Martin Chivers was way back on 174. So way back, that makes it sound like he didn't score a hell of a lot of goals. He did. But just comparatively, it's just incredible. And here Harry is, a goal behind. History will, Harry Kane will overhaul them all. History will show that Jimmy Greaves managed his 266 goals in 379 appearances. Harry Kane has had 412 appearances. The only thing I would argue with that, and it sounds weird when you're talking about a 21-year-old joining, but Jimmy Greaves joined Spurs from AC Milan as, well, it sounds weird to say, but kind of in his prime. He was only 21 years old. But he'd already scored 133 goals from 167 appearances. He was a machine, even from a young player. And obviously he signed for 99,999, wasn't it? So that the pressure was off him to not become, I think it was Bill Nick insisted on it, I think, that he didn't become the first £100,000 player. And so they took that one pound off. So he came in as a regular starter, starting every single game with this massive goals behind him. Whereas obviously we know Harry Kane's early years, he was playing little bit part things in like the Europa League. He had, I totaled it up, he had 27 matches across 3 seasons as a teenager and a little bit older. Minutes here and there from the bench in the league, in Europe, but kind of interspersed with his loans as well. And then even his breakthrough season under Poch, he spent the first 3 months coming off the bench. So it's difficult. You're probably looking at about 40, 45 early appearances. We probably had much less chance of getting a goal. He was coming on for a little couple of minutes here and there. So it kind of balances up and also shows how much of a catch-up that Kane has done with his goals, which has been incredible. I think the thing I just take away from it is that Spurs are so incredibly fortunate to have one amazing striker who scored so many goals, let alone 2. Just honestly, phenomenal pair of strikers. And I just want him to get silverware now. Not only because I want to see Spurs get silverware, but I want to see Harry Kane get silverware so that everyone outside Spurs and those like kind of almost like a select few outside the club realise how good he is. I've got some mates who support teams in the Championship, League One, League Two, who, when they see him for England, they know how good he is. It's definitely like a tribal thing, a rival club thing. But even some fans abroad, I think, just don't quite understand how good Harry is. And sadly, because I hope he does it, but I think silverware's probably that last hurdle so they can see him winning stuff. But yeah. Ridiculous striker, he really is. He was asked about being 1 goal behind Jimmy Greaves. He said, I try not to think about it. Sometimes you can think too much. Obviously, I feel in good form and I feel fit. My mindset is to help the team and hopefully the goals will come. And then just talking about the match, he said it was a tough game. We were clear favourites and people probably expected a bigger score, but credit to them, they stayed compact and made it difficult. It was tough. We thought after the first it might open up, but they stopped us getting the second one. It's good to get through. That was the objective, and we'll see who we get next. I think we said at half-time to get a few more players further forward because there was no real threat from them in behind. We got the goal at a good time. And it also shouldn't be underestimated at Spurs how much the young players look up to Harry Kane. Anyone in that academy who's come through the academy look up at Harry Kane as the one to follow, the one to emulate, the one to, follow his path, his sacrifices he's made off the pitch, and his discipline off the pitch to become what he has. Even like Oliver Skipp's a good example. He just looks at him with kind of like, you can see this awe. There was a good little bit from him after the game where he was asked about him and he just said, it's amazing. The goal against Palace, the quick feet, and then the goal today, it's something you need, especially in those type of games when you're going to stick players behind the ball and make it difficult for us. We are always delighted to have someone of his quality and give him half a chance. Well, that wasn't even half a chance, really. Give him a little bit of space and he'll always deliver for us. And on his record nearing Hall of Goals, he said, it's incredible. Credit to him and how he performs in every game. We're talking about a world-class striker. We see it in training, so it doesn't surprise us as much perhaps as other people, but it's incredible that he's on 265 goals, and I'm sure he'll get a few more before the season ends. I think we all are. I think we'd all like to see him get a few more on next Sunday as well in the North London derby, because I think as soon as he reaches that target or the goal tally, I think he instantly on paper becomes a Tottenham Hotspur legend, but I think he pretty much is already. I'm sure most of you would agree, to be honest. What else about that game? It was a game where Conte gave a lot of young players a chance again, which was nice. I'm claiming no credit for this at all, but I do love the fact that since I wrote kind of a piece and had a big old kind of a bit of a whinge, I guess, about the lack of a pathway for the younger players and how they weren't getting involved, a lot of young players have kind of got little minutes here and there. We've had a Harvey White debut in the Premier League. Alfie Devine came on for his home debut at the weekend as well. We've seen Brad Hill get chances. Look, it's not me. I'm absolutely not claiming it's anything to do with me. It's circumstance, it's coincidence, it's players being out injured. But it's nice to see. I said it in the last video and I stand by it 100%. I enjoy it more when I see young players coming through and proving themselves. It's fantastic. It's a really nice way to see football evolve in the right way, I think. And I think with the young players in what wasn't the greatest game in the world, there was probably more positives than negatives. Obviously, as I alluded to earlier, Yves Bissouma was in the starting lineup, but then we got kind of word about 5-10 minutes before kickoff that he was not going to be in the starting lineup. And he explained it. I've got the words from Christian Stellini. He's had an ankle problem. In the last 2 or 3 days, he wasn't good, but he tried to push himself to play. It's important for the players to tell us if they're not ready to play a tough game like this. And Bissouma said to us, I'm not 100%. It's better to play Skippy and Pape together. Or Pap. So yes, that meant Conte had to pair talk about youth, a very young midfield, 20-year-old Papa Matar, 22-year-old Oliver Skipp. And for old Skippy, Paul, that's probably a good thing, or happy anyway, he found out he was starting about 5 to 10 minutes before the kickoff. Probably why I felt, especially the first, maybe 15, 20 minutes, he was a little bit frantic in some of the stuff he did. He wasn't quite as switched on as he probably was later in the game. Actually, I got some quotes from him. He said, I found out literally 5 or 10 minutes before the kickoff. I could half see out the corner of my eye that he was in the warm-up speaking to the physios. So there was a little bit in the back of my mind that I thought I'd better be ready. Then 5 or 10 minutes before kickoff, I found out. So it was a quick scramble, check the set pieces, check everything. And I think he means by that where he's meant to be on attacking and defending the set pieces. You kind of forget these little things they need to know as well. It's not easy, but it's something you've got to be ready for. That could happen 5 minutes into a game, and it's something as someone could get injured. It was more a case of making sure I was ready for the set pieces. That's the big thing, because usually the day before, the team that starts will practice. But I've played enough games now to be ready, even though it still probably does take you a few more minutes to get into the game than perhaps it would otherwise. But after 10 to 15 minutes, you feel ready. I still feel with Skippy, I didn't think it was a great performance from him. I thought it started off shakily, like I said, and I did think he got a little better. He still looks a little bit rusty from that. The pelvic injury, of course, kept him out from January till the summer. And then obviously had that freak foot injury as well in pre-season. Very gruesome one as well. So I still think he's kind of starting to get sharper and sharper. I think I've got some quotes from him that kind of say it better than I can. He admits it's taken him a bit longer than he wanted to try to get up to full speed. He says, I feel like it does take more time than I appreciated at first. I thought I was going to come back and be flying, but it's taken a bit longer than I would have liked. I'll be honest about that. Definitely that World Cup period was massive for me because in pre-season I had the foot as well, which was bad timing. And this was like another restart for me and a chance to get in the running and just to sharpen us back, because nothing replaces being out there on the pitch. You can train as much as you like, but to get that match sharpness is always important. It was nice to get back-to-back games. So yeah, he had a few loose touches, I felt, especially in the first half. But a little bit like on Wednesday night, he kind of got into his rhythm and he got better and better, I felt, as he went on. Look, I think comparatively, he's not going to have looked as good alongside Pap Matar, who had his full debut. I thought he did very well. We'll talk about him in a second. But I think comparatively, it was an interesting one because Skippy was playing in the attacking role, whereas Pap Matar, who is versatile, can play in attacking roles. I've seen him do it for Metz as well. Strangely almost was playing in the anchorman role. So his stats, which I'll read out in a bit, were really, really good. And I'd be intrigued to know whether if you swap the two, would Skippy's have been the same, or would Pat Matar have done better in the attacking areas? Because obviously Skippy had a big chance second half. Ball dropped to him. He was completely unmarked. I think it was Brian Hill was trying to get through and it kind of rebounded into his path. He lashed it over. It was one of those where I had someone who was more of an attacking player would have maybe just had that composure to just keep it under the bar. It was a bit strange that I still didn't entirely... And I've thought this before, when we've had he and Bissouma together, that almost Bissouma has been sitting and Skip has been pushing forward almost like a winger at times when they had a midfield three. And you kind of think, why isn't Basuma being more box to box? Because we've seen him do that at Brighton. Whereas Skippy, we know as an anchor man, had an amazing season at Norwich. Taking him to the championship, the championship title. But yeah, he had some little quotes from him about that forward-thinking role. He said, first half we moved the ball well in and around the box. We moved the ball well, but we didn't really create much. At half-time, it was important to get a few more players higher up in and around the box and try to get the midfielders a bit higher and try to, as you saw with the goal, try to get players in and around playing combinations. Credit to them, they defended well, but once we got that goal, perhaps we should have scored more. He had a bit of a laugh at that as well. I mean, you can laugh about it when you've won 1-0. We probably wouldn't have been laughing had they not. We should have scored more, myself included. In the second half, we were getting more and more chances. Emerson hit the post as well. We had to make sure as well that on the counter-attack and set pieces, we did it right. It would have been good to score a few more goals and make it comfortable. You knew they were going to be up for it with a new caretaker manager. And he was asked kind of about that little role he was playing in, and he said it was that we had plenty of possession and the three centre-backs could deal with the build-up play. We just didn't need too many bodies behind the ball, and they knew they were going to be, and we knew they were going to set up quite deep, and it was trying to stretch them and get more space for Harry to drop into. It was things like that, combination play around the box, and if we have more bodies up the pitch for the turnover, because it's going to get tight, we can quickly win the ball back. And that was perhaps the idea of one of the midfielders getting higher and trying to support the attack. He'll get sharper, Skippy. There's going to be more minutes to be had. I do think, I saw some of the flack he was getting on social media. I do think people forget just how good he was last season before his injury. He was, I think it was one, wasn't he? Didn't he pick 3 man of the match awards up in a row? I do think we're quite quick to judge young players, either being good enough or not. It's a bit like Pat Matasar, who, I'm just about to speak about. He's had some really bright moments, but he, as a young player, will have some dips and his form will go down. And maybe people will forget these better moments. It's especially with young players. This is maybe why Conte doesn't want as many of them and his team, is that they are more consistent. They are more liable to have these kind of peaks and troughs of form, whereas maybe more regular, consistent players like Perisic is a good example. Perisic has been very steady since he's come in. And that's because he's kind of learned to have this consistency about his game. Not every older player does, but that's the way it works. So let's talk about Pat Matasar. Honestly, he was a joy to behold, to be honest. He really was. He looked like he's been playing in a Spurs shirt for years. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. He was so good. He was so in control. He was so dominant every time he had the ball. He was very comfortable on the ball. Other players were very comfortable giving it to him, despite the fact he's only 20. And the perfect illustration of that is he touched the ball 115 times during the game. Far more than anyone else on the pitch. The closest was Ben Davies, 105. Everyone else was below triple figures in terms of touches, and some way below triple figures. His passing accuracy was 90.4%. Skippy had 88.6%, if you're interested. And Sarr, during his action-packed shift, managed 11 ball recoveries, 5 tackles, 3 interceptions, and 1 clearance. Do you know what I really liked? He did a lot of great stuff on the ball and kind of winning it back, but I actually just loved his anticipation. His off-the-ball movement, I thought, was so good. The way he got around the pitch, you can see he's a clever player. He's got an eye for reading the game and knowing where to be at the right time. And that, if I'm a coach, if I'm a Conte or Stellini, I'm looking at it and just thinking, oh yes, what a joy to be able to develop that kind of player. It's a bit like Danny Cowley's been saying, or was saying, about Dane Scarlett, that you feel kind of almost privileged to be able to play your part in developing such a talented young player. And I asked Stellini on Friday about Sarr, and I said, first off, what have you been working with him on training? What are the specific things he needs to kind of work on? But also, how good can he become? His answer was pretty good. He said, he's a very young player. It's the first time he's come to England. He had 1 year experience in Ligue 1 in France. He technically had 2, maybe 2 and a bit. About his skill, he can do everything because he's a great player with many possibilities. He's a midfielder who can play in many positions. He's a talented player. I spoke at my last press conference about the way you have to wait with young players. If you use young players at the wrong time, you can make a mistake. That was to me. I was asking about Djed Spence. I remember that. I can't remember what presser it was. Oh, it would have been Carabao Cup. It would have been Forest game. And he said, sorry, I've absolutely stopped myself mid-quote there. If you work... No, sorry, back here. If you play young players at the wrong time, you can make a mistake. But with Pap, Antonio decided at this moment that Pap is ready and he improved a lot in training. We worked a lot in training on his body position and many skills he has to improve. He showed a desire to improve, and this is very important for us. If you work with a player and they show this desire, it's easier. With Pap, it's easy. He has to continue to work because we have a hierarchy. So he has to respect this, and we have to respect the players. He has the possibility now, and he has to show his desire and his quality. What I think is also quite impressive is he will fill out. You know, he's got quite a gangly, tall frame, but I think he will fill out and become even stronger. But his frame as it is pretty strong. You know, again, you kind of saw him knocking other players off the ball, and he's not really knocked off the ball at all either. He's got his long legs that he just kind of, when you think you've got away from him, he just stretches out this Inspector Gadget style leg and takes the ball and heads off with it. He's a very, very exciting young player. And he's going to be used more and more in their head. I thought it was interesting. I saw some kind of links with Salernitana. Serie A side have been linked with him. And I think their sporting director maybe has been talking about him. I only wonder whether that was pre him coming in recent games. Because I'm sure Spurs would have looked at the potential of loaning him. But then Conte was very clear after the Palace game. And he was talking about Sarr and Skip at the time. No young player. I do not want to loan out young players. They will stay with us. And actually I asked Stellini on Friday as well whether Brian Hill was included in that. And he said, yeah. Yeah, he said he is definitely included in that. So that's interesting. So that's Brian Hill not going anywhere either. Well, according to Stellini and Conte. So, I think 2 months ago, maybe, I think it would have been logical. I'm sure it would have been good for his development. But now he's caught Conte's eye. And obviously he's got his first start. He's got 2 appearances from the bench. I think we'll see him used a lot more in matches. I think later on, it's I've used this expression before, very much meet the parents. It's being within Conte's circle of trust. That's what it's all about. And I think Sarr has now pushed himself right into that. You know, Conte keeps praising him, and he now knows that he can put him on in a game, and he's probably not going to lose the ball. You know, he came on against Palace, and absolutely, I know they were 2-0 up at that point, but he was dominant. He was very good with the ball. And, you know, he will feel now that he can trust him in these tough situations. So it's almost like when you get as many injuries as Spurs do, why would you now send him away? It doesn't really make any sense. Senegal international. He's a very, very good young player. It doesn't really seem to make much sense to let someone else kind of reap the benefits of what you're doing with him, working with him. Brian Hill, again, another start for him. I thought he was quite bright. He was probably the one, obviously I know Harry Kane scored the goal, but around that I felt that Brian was one that probably was the most dangerous out of the Spurs trio up front. Really good movement off the ball. You could tell he's confident now. He didn't... I'm trying to think off my head whether he lost the ball much. I don't remember it too much. He wasn't really getting knocked off the ball. He looked, far more confident. I think he'll have given Conte something to think about in this respect of if Dejan Kulusevski is not 100% fit to start, then maybe he'll think, well, Brian Hill's, been okay. I think if there's a chance that Kulusevski's fit enough to start, he probably still does come in. But at least Brian Hill's put himself into that conversation, and he wasn't before. So again, put himself into that circle of trust. He really has. Sorry, I was talking about the Arsenal game. I don't know if I actually said that. Another young player, Ryan Sessegnon. Mixed match for me. Mixed match. I find it's probably the most frustrating thing watching him play. And have been a big Ryan Sessegnon fan over the years, and what an incredible young player he was coming through at Fulham. My problem I have now is that obviously he's had these different hamstring injuries. I am told that they are different hamstrings. It's not even the same muscle within the groups of muscles. That I just feel like he's so, how do I put this? Subconsciously worried about pulling a hamstring again. I don't feel he puts himself flat out into situations. And the Ryan Sessegnon of the Fulham years was a flying wide man that would just go past the defender like he wasn't even there. And then because of that ability he had, he was either able to get to the byline and cross it, or he could come inside and have a shot. I always say this, the year that Fulham came up, I think he scored something like 16, 17 goals. And I just feel like he's got this inbuilt restriction right now. He will either run at a player half pace, stop, and then pass it in the field, often to Sonny. Sonny didn't have a great game. He didn't really look like the confidence had flowed through him after that goal against Palace, which was a shame. But it was a tough game without too much service. Hopefully, against Arsenal, he really comes back to life. It is a team that he's scored a lot of goals against. But back to Sessegnon. He'll either play that quick pass off to someone inside, or he will try to get to the byline not quite at his full pace that we know he can go at. So the cross is either blocked or doesn't go anywhere. What I would say, when he did attempt crosses from kind of the mid-range area, he put in 3 really dangerous crosses. And they were ones that really the attackers in the box should have got far closer to. And he did walk away with an assist. Was there, played a very quick pass back to Kane, just at the right kind of wait for him to take it on and score. So, yeah, it wasn't... I wouldn't go as far to even say it was a good game from Ryan Sessegnon, but I think he just needs to get a few matches under his belt where the fear of... I don't know why I did that. The fear of an injury kind of comes out at the back of his mind. If he can get those under his belt, and I think we saw this at times last season, once he gets into a run of games and the fear goes, I think we see a much better Ryan Sessegnon that contributes with goals and assists and everything. He's scored a couple this year. Because I think my fear for him is that with Destiny Udogie coming in the summer, even Perisic, of course, proving how very dependable he is, if he doesn't rediscover his, I don't want to say bravery, that sounds wrong. If he doesn't rediscover that youthful abandon, I guess, that he used to have, or at least adapt his game to be better, I suppose, if he's not going to constantly fly at 100 miles an hour at people, if he doesn't kind of find himself back on track entirely, I fear that he might end up being the odd man out. And I don't want to say that because I think there's a hell of a lot of talent in there. It's just about him, shedding the fear. That's probably the best way to put it. Like I say, Alfie Devine came on, got his home debut for Spurs, 18-year-old. I like Alfie a lot. I get to see a fair bit of him playing for the under-21s and previously in the UEFA Youth League as well. And he's a very talented young man. He is. He obviously he came on towards the end of the game, had a really nice run actually, where he almost got hacked down, but he kind of kept going. And he got the ball out to, might have been Kane, I was trying to think who he played it to. But it was a really nice move, showed his kind of movement and awareness. And then the next day, today, he was playing against Liverpool for Spurs under-21s. Like I say, I watched that in the car as I wasn't driving. Spurs won 2-0. Liverpool did have a man sent off. Jamie Donnelly and Malachi Fagan-Walcott both scored. But yeah, good for Alfie. He is a young player who needs to head out on loan because I don't think he's going to get many sniffs at the first team unless, he takes them to Preston at the end of the month. But I think I know he was going to head out on loan in the summer and then he got that hamstring injury. At the Lameck Stadium, I was there when he did it. So yeah, no, good for him as well. Harvey White was playing today actually as well for the under-21s. There was one other young Spurs player there who was not able to play, and that was Dane Scarlett. He's at Portsmouth, but he was unable to play because you just can't play against your parent club in the FA Cup. He was there. I saw him. He was down in the tunnel area as they were all coming off, and Sonny went down, gave him a massive hug when he realised he was there. They were chatting for a while as well. So it'll be interesting to see what comes next with him, with Danny Cowley leaving, who was such a big fan of his. And whoever the new manager is, obviously Spurs will have to decide based, I guess, on who that is. We'll see with him. Oh, actually, I think I've got some quotes. Pompey caretaker boss Simon Bassey said, "I think he's been a good loan, certainly for Dane and us also. Obviously, a young boy, super talented. He's a brilliant kid, humble, hardworking, and everything you look for in a top player. He will be a top player. I have no doubt about that. I see no reason that Spurs want to call him back, and if they do, I'm sure we'll take Harry Kane off them instead." Yes, I'm sure. I'd gone out at that point because he came in second. I had to type up all the Stellini stuff, but I'm sure it was very funny. And there was another young player who played. Didn't get the minutes I think any of us really hoped for, but he got some, 13 whole minutes, and then added time. Djed Spence. You would have thought this would have been a good game to give him a start for his confidence, for his development against a League One team, but no. It was another match for Emerson Royal to show us all exactly what we know he can do. Emerson, who's 24 next weekend. How do I put this? Defended solidly enough, as he often does. Not all the time, but often. But as he also often does, offered very little going forward. He did, actually, I've got to give him some credit, of course. He got into the exact kind of area that Conte wants his wing-backs to get into. He attacked a cross from Son. It was a nice cross, actually, from Sonny to the back post, completely unmarked. And he was unfortunate. He planted it probably in the right direction you should. He put it across goal, but it struck the inside of the left post and went straight back to the keeper somehow. But yeah, he switched to the left, actually, when Spence came on for Sessegnon. And yeah, it's just the ball doesn't really advance when he's in possession. So yeah, Djed. So Djed did come on. We had the classic kind of that seems to be the repeated thing now, that there were some cheers as he was warming up, and there were big cheers as he was getting kind of his shirt on, ready to come on as well. There was a part of me that wondered whether they wouldn't play him at all, because obviously he's now cup tied. But I guess, if he is heading out on loan, he's probably not that fussed about whether he can play in the FA Cup or not. I guess it's probably not the biggest thing in the world. It's really difficult when it comes to Djed Spence, because Antonio Conte sees him week in, week out in training, so we have to take that on board as well. However, my biggest issue with it is that when he's got a system that relies so heavily on the wing backs, it's difficult to see the football reason for why he wouldn't give Djed Spence more opportunities, because he kind of fits the exact role that Conte would want of a wing back, and that's what I don't understand. Stellini said afterwards in the presser, just a brief line, he said, we gave minutes to Spence, and he is increasing his progression, and he's improving a lot. But these minutes, he's had 41 minutes across 6 appearances. And just think, when he chose to come to Spurs, 20 million deal it could be eventually worth for Middlesbrough. He had loads of other clubs from Germany, Italy, the Premier League interested in him. I can't imagine when he signed up, he thought to himself, 41 minutes in 6 matches, by January, that'd be awesome. And of course, in Antonio Conte, he's got a head coach that either didn't particularly want him or doesn't particularly need him. And it's frustrating, and it will be. Like I say, I can only stress that we don't see him on the training pitches. So perhaps, Conte seeing something we aren't aware of and just really feels he's not ready. I would say when he came against Portsmouth, he looked quite, so restricted is the way to put it. He looked like a man who did not want to be responsible for allowing Portsmouth to get a goal back. He wasn't flying at them though, like we've seen him do in the past. He was quite reserved in the way he was playing as well. And I guess, it's that. You kind of don't want to give him or Conte a reason to say, see? I always remember when poor old Troy Parrott, when he missed a penalty, didn't he? Was it against Norwich in the FA Cup in the shootout? And kind of Mourinho afterwards was pretty much that. See? You all wanted him to play. Look what he's done. Kind of thing. He doesn't sound anything like that. But it was kind of like that. And maybe that was in the back of Djed Spence's mind. Not Parrott, but the fact that, he didn't want to be responsible. Because when I talk about training, the one thing I hear from everyone within the club that I've spoken to about Djed is that he's been a model professional. And honestly, it's been a difficult time for him. It has. He's gone from a season where he's played week in, week out. And now he's made a big move to a club where he's barely getting any minutes whatsoever. But I'm told that, he hasn't complained, hasn't dropped his efforts. He's just kind of cracked on, tried to take everything on board from Conte and the coaches that he possibly can. All the coaches Conte's admitted that he has been steadily improving as well. And, we know there's big demands on a Conte wing-back, but it sounds like he's been trying to take it on. Unfortunate, I do think, as well, when he had the chance of the third friendly against Nice and he got the fever a little bit before he was ill. And now we have to find out what happens next, because I understand that Bayer Leverkusen, 3 Premier League clubs are all interested in taking him away from Spurs on loan. And I guess for Spence, it's about awaiting what Tottenham decide to do with him. I don't know. You'd imagine there'll be some kind of... how do I put this? You'd imagine that the clubs and Conte's views might be slightly different on it. Because obviously, I guess from the Spurs point of view, they've just signed him. Why would you want to loan him straight out? But then I guess it happened with Brian Hill last season as well under Conte. From what I understand, everything I've told, Djed wants to be a big success at Spurs, but he also understands that if there is a decision that he is to go out on loan, then it's going to be something he has to do to get some minutes under his belt and play games. From what I do understand, there's no desire whatsoever from either his side of things or the club side of things to send him back to a club in the Championship. The kind of feeling is that he's been there and done that, and now it's a case of either Premier League or a club playing in a top flight level that would provide him with growth, I guess, and development. It's just going to be an interesting one, this whole right wing back situation, because it's clearly an area where Conte sees that they can have an upgrade, but it is also an area where they have a ridiculous amount of options there right now, whether you believe they're good or bad. I've said this a million times, that Spurs' priorities are a attacking player as like the main priority and a right wing back, but also looking at any other opportunities that may arise if it is something that is one of their summer plans that they could bring forward if the right player came available. So that could be a central midfielder, it could be a centre back, but the eyes at first are on at first that sounds like they'd sign that first. The priority would be this attacker or right wing back, but you have to lose someone from the right wing back area, and I'd maybe say 2 even if you bring someone in, because Conte's idea is that you have 2 players in every position, but then you also have a young player that can fill in if there's an emergency, but also another adaptable player from another position that can play there if required. So, for instance, you've got on the left, you've got Perisic and Sessegnon right now, and Doherty, Davies, and even Harvey White could play there. So you've got 5 potential left wing backs there. On the right, you've got Doherty, Emerson, Spence. Perisic can play there. Kulusevski can play there. I know he's injured at the moment, but even Lucas seems to be kind of being groomed for the role as well. So I'd say more than a financial issue, it's like a bloated squad issue. And that's something, whereas if someone were to come in on that side, you would have to remove someone from that equation, like I say, maybe 2. So it could end up being I don't know. I suppose it would make more sense if you brought someone in to keep Djed as the third younger player, but also on the flip side, he needs to play. Whereas I can't see you'd sign someone and keep Emerson and Doherty as well. It doesn't really make any sense to me. But yeah, we shall see. It's kind of got to play a bit of a waiting game now, Spence, and see what Spurs are going to do, what offers actually come in. There's one thing between interest and another thing is actual offers. I feel sorry for him. Because if he's not going to play, he needs to go and play elsewhere. He was sold like a real dream move, wasn't he? A big club in Tottenham, Champions League club. It almost feels like he's been caught between Conte and the club, I guess. And he's just a young man that wants to play football. Just does. So, we'll see what happens with Djed. Of course, we have the North London derby next. Just a very brief look ahead. It's going to be an interesting game. It's going to be a tough one. You know, obviously we've had these back-to-back victories, back-to-back clean sheets. Arsenal are going to provide a way sturdier test than anything Spurs have had in the last week or so. Like I say, they've had these couple of days off they're having before they come back. I think Skippy said something about it, actually. He said, we've got a couple of days off, so it'll be nice to recover and think about other things. Then we've got pretty much a full week to prepare for Arsenal, so we'll be making sure that we watch their games back, do all the analysis, and making sure we're ready for that game. Obviously, Arsenal will play Monday night. However, is it at Oxford? I think it's at Oxford. Either way, you'd imagine they'll rotate quite heavily. So I don't think the 2 days thing extra will make much of a difference. But the good thing for Spurs is it's a substantial gap, I think, to get players back. That's one of the key things for them. From what I understand, Dejan Kulusevski is the best place to be back. And there's a real hope that he'll be involved. There's also a hope that Rodrigo Bentancur should be involved as well, which is a really good thing. I guess with him, you've got to decide whether is he fit enough to start the game or does he have to come back to the bench. You'd imagine if he gets any training sessions under his belt, he's probably going to start that game. It's quite interesting to see what happens there with those three. I'm sorry, Richarlison as well. Richarlison, there's a slight chance that he could be involved. If he is, it would be well ahead of schedule, or not well ahead, but ahead of schedule to where they wanted him to be after the hamstring injury. I do wonder if there's even a slim chance that he could play some part, whether they get him on there, because it just kind of lift everyone to have a stronger bench and a little bit of a threat as well from the bench, as well as if Kulusevski's get probably Brian Hill on the bench, you'd think. They've got to do something against Arsenal. It's become quite a crunch game, I think, because especially also with the mood of the fans, because obviously we know the dissatisfaction and everything about Spurs right now, despite the fact they are fifth, 2 points behind third place Newcastle in the last 16 in Champions League, but it's just a lack of, I guess, being convincing about it all, and obviously being the transfer window and hoping stuff will happen. They can't let Arsenal get even further ahead of. I mean, they're 11 points ahead of Spurs right now with a game in hand as well. So I think they have to start trying to put a dent in those title ambitions, because if Mikel Arteta and Arsenal were able to win the title with a young squad, doing it in the way they've done it, with a bit of patience as well for a man that, there was calls for him to go among a fair few Arsenal fans, it would really be rubbing it in Spurs' noses, I think, as well. Basuma will be back. Asked Delaney, said, will he be fine for Arsenal? He said, absolutely. So he's definitely one that will be there. We don't really hear much about Lucas Moura. I'm going to have to get an update on him, but nobody really seems to mention him, which is not a good thing. Obviously got that inflamed tendon problem. And I just wonder now, with his contract in the last 6 months, it kind of seems to be making the decision for Spurs, doesn't it? Whether to take that option for another 12 months. If this injury is just going to drag on and on, it doesn't seem like something you'd really do. I think Spurs, Conte needs his big players available for this game. Kulusevski was missing, wasn't he, for the defeat at the Emirates earlier in the season. So getting him back would add a huge dollop of creativity, I think, to what you're doing. It's got to do something for the fans. You know, it'll be sold out again. It'll be absolutely rammed. More than 60,000 people in there. They haven't been served up particularly great stuff over the months. A victory against Arsenal, if they could do it, I think would be a perfect way to start really kind of paying them back, the fans, for putting up with, not some great football at all this season for large chunks. So, hopefully it happens. So like I say, just kind of a recap going back. I mean, the Qatar stuff, I'm sure that will continue to rumble along. Like I say, all I can say is what the club is saying. They're saying absolutely no truth in it. But, that's what the club would say. That's my only thing about it, is that is what the club would say. I think the main gist of the thing about it was they were meeting various clubs with a potential maybe buying in or taking over. I don't know. But, that's what Spurs are saying. It's up to you whether you want to believe it or not. And it is definitely something you'd say if you didn't want something to come out, for those who like a bit of paranoia. But we'll see. It's one of those where if it did ever become something, they certainly wouldn't be able to deny it for any longer. But it's just quite interestingly how strong they came out tonight when asked, which you can read everything into it. You really can. You can read completely both sides of it. So there you go. Right, I'm going to head off and have my Sunday evening. But I'm trying to think if there's anything else I haven't covered. I don't think so. I don't know. I just get this feeling that something's going to start heating up in the transfer market for Spurs next week. I just feel like something's on the horizon. I don't know what it is, but I just feel that we're at this stage now where deals will start to become clearer. Approaches will start to be leaked out. Tomorrow I'm going to ring around loads and loads of various contacts within the game and agents and everything involved. So I presume I'll have hopefully more to speak to you about in midweek. We've still got the financial stuff to come out at some point, please, Spurs. It's been a long time. And I know it's all pretty much ready there to go out. Or I was told a while back it was. So, hopefully we get info on that, which will provide some interesting stuff to talk about. But I do feel that we're going to start to see the transfer stuff ramping up now as well, especially as other clubs start to make their moves, and with the North London derby as well. Because if Spurs were, let's say, to lose that, things suddenly go very pear-shaped, I think, in terms of atmosphere, attitude, and I guess pressure on them having to push forward in the transfer market where they really don't want to make mistakes in. We'll see. Right, I am going to head off. As always, stay healthy, stay safe, look after yourselves, and I shall catch you later.